Blessed be guys and ghouls. Sorry if the lighting is a little funny. I had the excellent idea to film outdoors today because when I woke up this morning, it was absolutely gorgeous. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and there was no way I was going to coop myself up indoors. So I got all ready to go, and by the time I was ready to head out, it has become overcast and windy, and I'm starting to feel sprinkles. So I'm going to try to make this brief before daylight fades on me completely. But this is a video I've been planning on doing for quite some time. It's a subject that's been talked about quite a bit. I know Angela Benedict created a video on the subject. I'm going to link to that down below in the description. But today I really wanted to talk to you about goth subgenres. Bear with me. I'm going to try to make this quick. But as I'm sure everyone with and without the community has noticed, that people who identify as goth tend to sort of deviate towards drastically different style choices. For example, there's the romantic goths, which is what most people think of when they think of goths. The people who wear, Victorian corsets and bustles and very kind of elegant, almost vampiresque. I know a lot of people don't like to associate goth with vampires, but let's be real here. There's also cyber goths, which are very futuristic. They tend to, it's not as popular as it used to be, but still, I always admired cyber goth style because it was just so cool and so out there. Basically, people with, these kind of plastic dreads and vinyl clothing, very kind of angular, exotic makeup. Very cool, very futuristic. There's also the mall goths, which most people tend to scoff at and say isn't really goth, but hey, I'm all for inclusivity here. And mall goths are typically people who start off by shopping at Hot Topic. They tend to be teenagers, very kind of limited, just dipping their toes into the goth scene, not really knowing what they're doing. So just kind of gravitating towards where teenagers tend to shop anyway, which is the mall. One subculture of goth that we've been seeing kind of resurge is the 90s goth, which is a style that I personally borrow very heavily from. It has its roots based on when goth became really popular in the mainstream culture. Think like Nancy Downs and The Craft, that sort of thing. There's also newer subgenres of goth that have just started sort of rolling things out. Subgenres such as new goth, which tends to have more of a witchy kind of American Horror Story vibe. That is another genre that I also borrow heavily from. I'll go into my personal style choices in a different video. The message I'm trying to get across is that there are tons of different kinds of goth out there, and yet they're all the same. Let me explain. Because although at a glance, romantic goth and cyber goth couldn't be more different, the fact of the matter is, like anything else in society, any other stylistic choice, people in general have many different interests, and they'll magpie certain elements that they find personally appealing. I have seen this in basically every stylistic category that people tend to lean towards as far as aesthetic wise, and in every single style of dress. This is definitely not something that's exclusive to goth. People tend to become very competitive and judgmental. For instance, let's say you're a redneck. You constantly have people saying like, oh, you're not country enough, Oh, those aren't Wranglers you're wearing. Oh, you don't have any rodeo belt buckles, so you're not really a cowboy. That sort of thing. And goth definitely has that in spades, but it's kind of unique because whereas other people tend to be competitive as far as their general appearance, goth goes so far as to divide it not just into the genre as a whole, which it certainly does that, but also into all of the subgenres as well. Like, for instance, if someone likes the new goth fashion, for example, they like harnesses and kind of a witchy aesthetic, but at the same time, they don't feel comfortable wearing occult symbolism, for example. You have these people saying like, oh, you're not really new goth, or you're not even goth in general because they don't like this particular element. Or let's say that someone is a romantic goth but doesn't really care for corsets. Then people say like, oh, you're not really a romantic goth, you know? And it's really weird how like there's no regard for people and their personal aesthetic. It's very bizarre and it's very exclusive to goth, whereas from the outside looking in, like goth, all the subgenres have certain things in common. But people within the community don't really see that. They see, if, for instance, let's say that you have been a trad goth or a death rocker for years, and you've started experimenting with, say, new goth or pastel goth. People all of a sudden feel like you're a poser and that you're not really goth at all. Sorry, there's people playing music. The joys of being in a public place. But if you start to experiment with aesthetics outside of the one you are known for, people say that you're a poser because you're not committed to this one subculture. And that is just stupid. Not only is it keeping people from growing and keeping the culture from growing, but also it goes back to the disease of goth being just super judgmental, which is so stupid because as goths, we get judged by society all the time. I've literally lost count of the times that I have been judged by how I dress. I mean, just recently, I went to Disneyland and I was wearing a studded collar, one that I've worn to Disneyland several times. And when I went through security, they gave me shit about my collar and told me that I couldn't wear it, and they had me take it off. Granted, they originally wanted me to throw it away and not even bring it into the park, but I threw a big fit about it because I had been to Disneyland for years, several times, more times than I can count, and that was the first time ever that they had an issue with my dress. And I didn't want to go back to my hotel to take it home, so... And it was very weird because I also kind of reached out to the Disney community, and I also...
Love you.
An example of someone not being judgy. Take a page out of that book. So I reached out to the Disney community, and it was very weird because I'm part of numerous Disney aficionado Facebook groups, and my message about being discriminated against because of my spiked collar, which they were more like studs than spikes, they were tiny. They claimed that they could be wrapped around a fist and used as a weapon, where there are things you can find within the parks that are more dangerous than that. But heaven forbid I wear a spiked collar. So I've got to say, usually I'm pretty tolerant when it comes to being judged for how I dress. I mean, you'd have to be in order to wear this aesthetic. But I reached out to the Disney community and the Facebook groups that I'm a member of, and my message never even made it past the mods. And then I reached out to the Disney goth community, as in like Batsy and the Fun Park, and I discovered that this has actually been a security standard at Disney for years. But for some reason, this, apparently, this is the first time I ever experienced it and the first time anyone ever mentioned it to me. And it was just kind of met with like a lukewarm reception. Like, oh, well, good to know we won't wear our spikes. And it's like, no, that noise. Like, why am I the only person feeling targeted and upset about this? Like, no, that's not okay. That's not okay. Like, they had an issue with my spikes and made me take them off, but they left my self-defense keychain on my purse. Didn't even bat an eye. TSA won't let this through a plane, but they didn't care that it was attached to my bag or that I had pepper spray in my bag. But no, heaven forbid I wear my spiked collar. Granted, this thing and the pepper spray I forgot were in my bag, but I found them later and I'm like, what the hell? Oh no, heaven forbid a goth wears a spiked collar in Disneyland. Rant over. Sorry, I digressed. But my point is, the outside community and society at large already judges goths enough. Why are we judging each other? We should be united. If we unite, can you just imagine how awesome that would be? For instance, let's use the example of the trad goth wanting to experiment with pastel goth. How cool would it be if when that trad goth approached people who have been wearing the pastel goth aesthetic for years? What if that person approached them and they were met with open arms, saying like, oh, hey, I really love your hair. You know, that Robert Smith look is so cool. I've aspired that forever. What's your secret? Oh, hey, you like my pink corset? Awesome. This is where I got it. How amazing would that be? And like I said, it encourages personal growth within each individual goth, but it also helps our community get stronger and more united. And that's something we desperately need in this day and age. I know that the goth community throughout its entire, So in the almost 50 years that goth has been, goth's always been around, but in the 50 years since the goth subculture has been a subculture, we have always experienced these ebbs and flows in popularity and mainstream support. We've gone from being novelties to being downright reviled and vilified. This isn't a cycle that's going to end anytime soon. However, in this day and age with the internet, and it's so easy for people to be anonymous and bully each other without any repercussions, I'm seeing our culture go from being strong and unified, where we were all mutual weird kids and we'd go to the goth clubs together and kind of everyone knew everyone. And there was almost like a black market, no pun intended, of mixtapes and mutual love of the music and the fashion that was getting swapped between people. Now that goth is existing more and more on the internet, I've noticed that the culture's fracturing, that people aren't unified anymore. Instead of relying on each other to figure out where to get the clothes that we like or where to find the music that we like, because it's so easy for us to do these things by ourselves, we're losing that sense of community that we once had. And I hate that. It's heartbreaking. I guess what I'm trying to say is, let's just shelve the judgment, shelve the idea that subcultures are just cut and dry, black and white, mostly black categories that you have to check a box in order to be a goth. Let's encourage dabbling. Let's encourage personal growth, because the more approachable we are as a culture to each other, the more approachable we'll be to the community at large as well. I would love it if one day I could go to Disneyland or walk around my neighborhood even, and instead of having people just whisper behind my back, which they think I don't hear, but I do, it would just be cool if people would be just more interested instead of afraid. Like, I get it, I'm macabre, and for people who don't know me, it can be a little intimidating, but nothing can be farther from the truth. And like any other group in the history of ever, there are jerks, but there's also really great people. And by infighting within our community, what we're doing is we're showing the outside community that we don't play nice with others. And like I said, there are people who don't do that. But I feel like if nothing else, we should be supportive of each other. And you know what? If that person who likes to wear 90s goth wants to mix in some new goth clothes, or if that person who typically wears cyber goth wants to experiment with steampunk, which isn't even goth technically, you know what I mean? It's just, we should be really supportive of each other's choices, because you never know. You never know what lessons we'll learn from each other. And we need to be supportive of each other because we're all the weird kids. Let's stick together, okay? Blessed be.